It's good to be with you this morning. In 2007, I was working in a refinery up in the northern part of Texas. And I was on a contract job there because Jennifer and I had just started our company about a year prior. And I was implementing a mechanical integrity program using some of the new systems in risk-based inspection. I was sitting in the office this day, and one of the primary client contacts named Jason walks by, and Jason says, "Hey, Ryan, you got a minute?" I said, "Yeah, Jason." He said, "I want you to come in and join me. We've found an issue. And I know you've been in a lot of refineries. You're a mechanical integrity guy, so I'd like you to come put in your 2 cents." Okay. So Jason and I walked down the hall to the main conference room in the facility there, and I walk in, the plant manager sitting there, the maintenance manager, the operations manager, the technical manager, a couple of operations folks, inspectors. There's probably 20 people sitting in this room. And I don't know what we're there to talk about. So we sit down, and pretty soon it comes out that one of the operators had used a thermography gun and found some hot spots on a couple of the heater tubes. And into the meeting ensued really heated discussion, forgive the pun, talking about what to do with this heater tube. And as I listened to the maintenance manager, the ops manager, engineering manager, the inspection guys, the operators, I listened to them talk about what to do. There was a lot of vehement, I'd say, arguments about the projected reliability. What's going to happen? Are these tubes maybe creeping? Might they rupture? What might be the impacts if they do? Should we shut down now and then repair the heater, or should we wait until a turnaround that was just 6 months later? And as I watched the plant manager named Tom survey the situation, listen to all the difference of opinion, I sat there, kept thinking to myself, I wonder what the history is. How much data do we have about this heater? And as I listened, the conversation turned to that. How hot have the tubes operated in the past? What's the normal heat coming out, the normal temperature coming out of the heater? Have we had any upset conditions or failures in the past? What's the material of construction today versus what it was 10, 15 years ago? Have we done any thickness measurements, or we strapped the tubes to look for creep? What history, what data do we have? The meeting broke that day with the charge. Everyone was supposed to go out, spend the next hour or 2 hours gathering more information to come back and make a decision. This was 12 years ago. Now, knowing who the audience is here today, I imagine most of us have been in a meeting kind of like that. In fact, imagine that we were in a meeting like that today, 12 years later, and the world is talking about big data and machine learning, artificial intelligence. There are companies literally planning to spend billions of dollars to figure out how to better utilize their data, and not just in oil and gas. I pick refining because that was my background, but you could be talking about mining operations, wastewater treatment facilities, specialty chemical operations, food and drug, automotive manufacturing, power generation, any large-scale facility. The name of the game today is, how do I become more reliable? And more importantly, how do we leverage our data? So imagine a group of us were sitting at a facility today, and the same type of situation came up. A specific problem or a concern was identified in the facility, and the maintenance manager, the operations manager, the technical manager, the engineering manager, the plant manager sitting there debating what to do. I would submit to you that the discussion wouldn't look all that much different. The challenge would be, what do we know, and where can we get more data? And eventually, people would go out and gather data, and I've been in the room when people bring in literally boxes full of files and set them down and start getting out stuff with the plant manager, flipping through things and looking for records and going into historical databases, looking up information. All the while, the plant manager is trying to ascertain which opinion does he or she listen to. In fact, interestingly today, with all of the talk about big data, machine learning, and artificial intelligence, with all the reams of data, literally thousands of data points a day that are gathered in these facilities about the machines that we use, if you're the plant manager in that facility at that time, the machines you're trying to understand the most are the ones sitting in the room with you. What are the motivations? What are the decision processes that a group of humans are going through as they look at this situation and try to take data into their brains and come out with an opinion or a logical outcome? A lot of studies have been done on this in the last few years. In fact, to really think about the human process and how that human process connects to data, we have to go all the way back to the 1950s to a guy named Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman grew up in the 1930s, 1940s in Israel. And he was the first Israeli psychologist assigned to the IDF, the Israeli Defense Federation. So he comes in and he says, and he's charged immediately in 1953 when he got his job as part of the IDF, he was charged with trying to figure out how do we determine which Israeli officers will be good? Which ones will be good leaders? And Kahneman begins to look at the data processes, the systems that they use to interview officers, interview potential soldiers, and determine which roles they should go into in the IDF. And Kahneman starts looking at their prior processes, and he looks at their grading systems. So you can imagine a set of interviews, much like we use in our companies today, in which somebody would come in and sit down with, usually in his book, he talks about more often than not a woman, and the woman would talk to this potential soldier and ask a series of questions. And she would form an opinion of this potential soldier and grade this potential soldier in a number of areas. So Kahneman went back and looked at all of the history, all of these dossiers that covered all these soldiers and said, how predictable were our interviews? How often did the interviewers get it right in terms of a potential soldier's ability to lead a force, and how often did they not? And he actually asked the question too, what measures a good soldier? Could I be, he postulated, so callous as to base the decision on how many deaths were experienced under that officer's charge? After doing a bunch of study, Kahneman realized that their interviews were basically worthless. It was a crapshoot. For all the interviews they were doing, the human ability to assess another human was irrelevant. They might as well have rolled the die. So he began a process of building a different set of interviews to better gauge how a potential soldier's prior performance would translate into their future ability as a leader, a military leader. Over the next 20 years, the Israeli performance in the battlefield would jump up substantially. So much so that when Kahneman visited the United States 20 years later, he was invited by some of the top generals at the Pentagon to come in and answer the question, how are you picking your leaders? How are you picking your officers? You have the same guns we do, you have the same physical makeup that we do, yet your performance on the battlefield statistically is second to none in the world. What is it you're doing? Now, one of Kahneman's big theories he came up with is called behavioral economics, and he would go on to win the Nobel Prize for behavioral economics, even as a psychologist, for committing to the fact that, in the end, economists like to talk about data. We believe in supply and demand, and the numbers say if demand is up and supply is down, the price will go up, and then we believe the other way around, that if supply is up and demand is down, the price will go down, and we believe that the average person makes their purchasing decisions based on logic. Kahneman says you're full of crap. That is not why people make decisions. In fact, in Kahneman's book called Thinking Fast and Slow, he talks about the decision processes that go into the human mind, and specifically, what motivates a person. Now, if you want to understand human motivation, you actually have to go back even further behind Kahneman to 1943. A psychologist named Andrew Maslow built a pyramid that today we still use called the human hierarchy of needs. And in it, there's 5 basic levels. The first level is safety. I want to know that I'm not going to die in some sort of attack or starve. Basic safety, immediately today. The second layer is sustenance. Food, shelter, water, that sort of thing. The next 3 layers now become more intrinsic to a human being. The third one is belongingness or love. The fourth one, as we move up the hierarchy, is to matter, to be important. And then the 5th one he called self-actualization. So you think about, yes, once I've got safety and food covered, what do I want as a human? I want belonging, and I want to matter. Sometimes in leadership today, we talk about purpose and belonging are the 2 things all humans seek. So imagine if we go back to that room we're sitting. where a bunch of people have come in, the maintenance manager, engineering manager, ops manager, and the plant manager sitting there trying to assess the ability of all of these people to give him input. Does he say to himself, what's most important to these people is purpose and belonging? You know, at some point in this process, go back to 2007, I was sitting in this room, we had come back to talk about this heater and what to do. And we got all sorts of ideas and all sorts of data. People saying that, look, we've done these kind of tests before, we've looked for hot spots, these things, we can last, we don't think creep is happening, it's not above the creep temperature for that metallurgy. Others saying absolutely not, we got to shut this thing down. Some people asking, can we repair this thing online? In fact, for the only time in my history, I actually heard that there was an outfit. There was a group, a company, that would put on some sort of space-age technology and walk into a burning heater and do a repair. I'd never before heard a plant manager say the words, "Are you kidding me?" Ideas were coming out of everywhere. Fast forward to today, and I submit to you that we're still in the same scenario. We're still calling in experts. We're asking for different ideas, and at the end of the day, we try to build some consensus. If we as a group agree, then that's the best we can do. And with all of this data sitting in files, sitting in systems, and there's so much of it, not only do we not know what to do with it, we're so overwhelmed with it, it does more harm than good. Hence the push today for machine learning, artificial intelligence. Hence the push for behavioral economics to somehow weave in and potentially even trump the experts. How do we have better machines if the people making decisions about them are so biased? Now, some will say, Ryan, that's a bad example, Ryan. Surely we are logical. We're more thoughtful than that. As a people, we don't fall into groupthink that easily, Ryan. Yeah, let's talk about something as important as, say, our health. In 1977, a bunch of stuff was happening in the United States, and some data was coming up that we were having an increased rate of heart disease. Slight increases were starting to be experienced around the country. And there was a new theory out there that we needed to be eating a lot more carbohydrates because fat was turning into cholesterol, causing people to be obese, causing heart disease, causing hypertension, high blood pressure. And so in 1977, Senator George McGovern, who at the time was the chairman of the Senate Special Committee on Human Health, convened a tribunal. And over the next few days, McGovern would bring in experts from all over the world to theorize, to speculate, to postulate on what was important when it came to obesity, diabetes, human health, heart disease. By the end of this several-day tribunal, the Senate had decided dietary fat is bad, and we need to increase the amount of carbohydrates that we eat to get rid of dietary fat. 2 years later, the U.S. government would put together the U.S. Dietary Recommended Guidelines. We've all seen them. We grew up in the 1970s and 80s and 90s hearing about the relative portions of proteins and fats. A group of politicians would prescribe the recommended diet without looking at one single study, listening only to a group of experts. In 1977, if you were to look at my graph here, you'd see in 1977 the obesity rate in the United States was around 11-12%. Starting in 1979, it began to creep up because as people tried to pull fat out of their diets, what did they replace it with? To get flavor, they replaced it with sugar. During the last nearly 40 years, the average U.S. diet has tripled, the average U.S. person has tripled their intake of sugar. The obesity rate in the United States has gone from 11-12% to 34%. Increase in the rate of diabetes has doubled. The profound health effects of switching to carbohydrates is staggering. And now there's books being written all over the place, from food to the obesity code, all talking about the detrimental effects of high carbohydrate diets. Why did we all do it? Group think. Human beings have a natural desire for belonging and purpose. So if you're not sure of the answer, what will you default to? What everybody else is doing. Hence the reason when someone will present you with a specific challenge, say a technical problem at a facility or with a piece of machinery, even though we say, well, we should never say the words, that's what we've always done, but it is the place that we start. Human beings are also predetermined, or we have a tendency to look for a solution immediately and then look at data with an interpretation or with an attempt to back up that data, back up that predetermined solution. So in other words, if I form an opinion very quickly, this is what I think, every time a new piece of data information comes in, I will look at it in the light to support whatever my opinion I've already formed is. Let's use the example of professional sports. Have you seen the movie Moneyball? Moneyball was about the 2002 Oakland Athletics, and Billy Beane was the general manager at the time who decided that he was going to try to use different data to build his baseball team. About 4 years later, a guy named Daryl Morey was hired to be the general manager of the Houston Rockets. He is still the Houston Rockets general manager today. He served in that capacity for 12 years. During that time, the Houston Rockets have had the second highest winning percentage of any NBA team. Daryl Morey's basketball playing experience was he tried out for his high school team. Morey was an analytical guy, a statistician. Morey came into the Houston Rockets in 2007 for his first season. He began to evaluate what data do we use in our draft choices. What information do we look at that helps us predict the performance of this athlete in the NBA based on their performance in college? So Morey had his staff, because this is in 2007, had his staff run up to the NCAA offices, photocopying and scanning all of the historical data of all these draft choices to try to figure out what data was relevant from their college performance to predicting their NBA performance. What Morey found out over the next 3 years was fascinating. Found out that most of the data we use, for example, rebounds per game, not a particularly relevant statistic in college to their NBA performance. In 2010, a young Asian kid graduates from Harvard, accidentally gets picked up, I think it was by the New York Knicks. The New York Knicks are getting ready to cut him. He doesn't have the physique or the appearance of a world-class basketball player. One game in the middle, they're at Madison Square Garden, and they have almost all their other players are injured. Literally, the back office is about to cut this player. And they say, you know what, let's put him in. So Jeremy Lin goes in for his first game. Lights up Madison Square Garden, and the term Linsanity is created. If you ask Daryl Morey, tell me about Jeremy Lin, he would tell you this. By the time 2010 came around, our stats told us, our data told us Lin was a no miss. He was an absolute gem in the draft. Well, Morey, why didn't you pick him? Because he didn't look like an NBA player. Our preconceived notions for what an NBA player is supposed to look like trumped our data, even though we believed in our data. Now he went back and he said, now what was it? What was the big piece of data that told us Lin would be awesome? Rebounds per game, not all that relevant. Shots per game or points per game could be relevant, but you had to qualify it a lot. You had to look at what type of teams did they play, how many minutes did that player play. But there's one stat Morey found out had a bigger impact on someone's performance in the NBA, and you didn't have to qualify it. Speed of the first two steps. What? That's right, Morey found out in all of his research that not the ability for a player to come down with the ball or the number of points they put in a game, but the ability to do this was a better indicator of their future success in the NBA statistically by studying the data. And think about this. How many millions of dollars are spent assessing an NBA player before the draft? Millions and millions of dollars. Analysts paid several $100,000 a year are sent to look at every single aspect of this player. Heaven forbid that Morey would bust, pick a player in the first round with some guaranteed multi-million-dollar salary that turned out to flop. More money is spent on NBA players and evaluating NBA players than any other humans in the world. More money is spent to evaluate those people. And if you ask Morey, tell me about all of these high-priced experts. Tell me about all of their ability to assess NBA players. He would have said, it's irrelevant. All of the experts, because they weren't looking at data, They were judging on opinions based on historical trends or historical feelings had become irrelevant in the world of basketball. Now, if you go back and you ask Daniel Kahneman, are you telling me that experts are irrelevant? Heck, I got a lot of them sitting in the room today, and they're sitting there going, Ryan, I'm not too infatuated with your speech. Ryan, are you telling me experts are irrelevant? No. In fact, Kahneman says there's two very specific things we look for in our experts to know that they really are experts. First of all, though, he says, what is it that we use normally as humans? How do we gauge if somebody is an expert? What is it when someone walks in the room, how do we say, yes, we believe that guy's an expert? He says, well, the first thing we look at is age. The second thing we look at is resume. The third thing we look at is confidence. Man, that Ryan guy sure seems confident what he's talking about. He must be an expert. Kahneman says there's two things we should look at to determine if somebody really is a verified expert versus having the illusion of expertise. He says, one, is the thing they are opining on something that you can see repetitively? So there's a consistent set of situations or consistent set of inputs that lead to the same output. If he's opining on a situation that does stack up that way, that's criteria one. Criteria two, has this person who claims to be an expert been in that situation sufficient numbers of times, numbers of repetitions, personally touched it so that they could have formed expertise? This gets to the challenge we face in modern industry today. Now, I've spent most of my career in refineries. I've been in about half the refineries in the United States. And in all that time, I am an expert. I've done expert witness work in court cases, sat on several industry committees, all for mechanical integrity, degradation of fixed assets, API codes 510, 570, risk-based inspection. I have participated in helping write those, so I am an expert. And I'm knocking myself. Why? I'm not an expert in the failure of equipment. I am an expert in the degradation of equipment. It's very easy to confuse those two. Ryan, why would you say you're not an expert in the failure of equipment? Because I've only been in a plant when or after a piece of equipment failed to personally look at it probably 5 times, which is a lot more than most. See, in the industry today, we have a new problem. We don't have enough failures. Our representative sample isn't big enough to form expertise around the failures. However, we have enough degradation to form expertise around that. In the last 10 years, from 2009 to 2018, in that span of 10 years, the average utilization in refineries has ranged from 82% to 93% during that time. And so if you were a refinery manager saying, hey, I'd like to get more utilization, because we get more utilization, not only do we have more safety, less downtime, less failures that would be causing a lack of utilization, we also make more money. That's better business. I want to be doing that. Okay, we want to prevent failures. Well, how many failure experts are out there? You would say, well, let's say we talk just about the cat cracker. There's only about 110 cat crackers in the United States. How many of them had a failure in the last 3 years? 2 of them. That is a statistically irrelevant sample size. So how do we then get our utilization from 82% to 93% and past? We have to combine models and data that we've never had to combine before. In fact, if you go back before 2009, go back to the 1980s, even the 1970s, utilization rates in the United States for our refineries at the time were in the 70 percentile range. 70, 75, even high 70s. At that point, a lot of our issues were specific machine issues. At that point, it was singular issues. You could look out and say, yes, that dadgum compressor keeps breaking. Let's have a group of experts in compressor construction build us a new one. And that solved problems. From the 1970s through the 1980s, even the 1990s, our utilization in refineries improved because we sought out specific equipment issues and solved them. Today, we have a different problem. We're at the Turbomachinery and Pump Symposium. When I talk about the compressors and the pumps and the pipes and the pressure vessels, the heat exchangers, the filters, the conveyor belts that make our systems run, No longer is it just about the machine that is in front of me. It's about how that machine interacts with all the other machines. We've gotten past most of the singular design issues. We're now talking about system issues. Now, the need for data is as strong as it's ever been. But over here, I've got a bunch of data guys. The Intels of the world, the HPs. I've even got the Amazons of the world trying to figure out how to use big data. And for all of us who have been on Amazon, we find it really weird when I log in and Amazon says, you might like this book, and you might like this exercise machine, and you might like this grill spatula. How did it know that? Amazon is mastering data in the retail space. But think about this. Something like 470 million people access Amazon every day. Lots of data. Lots of samples. In the heavy industry space, the big data and the experts, people feel like are competing. I have heard experts say, oh, no, that big data is never going to work. What does the expert want? Purpose and belonging. If big data can answer all the questions, that expert gets neither. Fear of being replaced by machines and being replaced by big data is driving this competition between the two. But I'll tell you this. Because our systems are so complex, big data will never have the impact on a refinery it's having on Amazon if we don't use our experts. And experts that solve those same problems of the 1970s and 1980s will not improve our utilization without data. While the rest of the world is out there today talking about and spending and investing billions machine learning, artificial intelligence, big data, Internet of Things, IoT. While the rest of the world is doing that, in the heavy industry, petrochemical plants, specialty chemicals, mining operations, there is a secret that has yet to be unlocked. And it is that we have to put our experts, combine our experts with our data in ways we've never done before. I'll give you an example. If I said, Ryan, what are you an expert in? I said, I'm an expert in degradation. I can build you a model that tells you if I've got a certain amount of sulfur and a certain amount of water and a certain temperature and a certain type of carbon steel at a certain velocity, I can predict degradation fairly well. I can't predict failure very well. But Ryan, they're related. Yes, but they're very different. The future is going to be as the experts put their logic into better models than we ever had to leverage data in ways we've never been able to use it. And you'll see our utilization begin to climb again. And some people might say, well, how valuable is that? 135 refineries in the United States today, the average refinery processes about 130,000 barrels of crude oil a day. If you use a crack spread of just $5 a barrel, you'd say, wow, the average refinery, if they can gain 10% utilization, is talking about a millions of dollars. I think it's $12 to $15 million a year in bottom line performance, not even talking about the safety and the environmental impacts. And we've seen that difference just in the last 10 years. So you average that across an entire industry, you're talking billions. Just in refining. Exploration and production, petrochemicals, pharmaceuticals, food and drug, mining operations, wastewater treatment facilities, of which there are something like 10,000 in the United States today, all trying to boost their utilization, are going to be asking the same question. How do I combine my data with my experts to solve problems I've never solved before? And it goes back to this idea that I started with. When that plant manager or that business leader, that expert steps into the room, in order to solve that problem, it can't just be about the machines that are out in the facility running. It also has to be about the machines that are making the decisions.